and welcome. I'm AnewZ and you are watching AnewZ. Here are the headlines. The White House says some Chinese goods face 245% tariffs. U.S. stock markets drop. Deadly attacks on camps in North Darfur force tens of thousands to flee. Indigenous rights activists press for greater international recognition at the UN. Thank you for tuning in. China now faces U.S. tariffs of up to 245% due to retaliatory actions, the White House said. The new total rate seems to apply to electric vehicles and syringes. That includes a 125% reciprocal tariff, a 20% one to address the fentanyl issue, and the so-called Section 301 tariffs on specific goods that range between 7.5% and 800%. U.S. markets have since opened with a decline. Among the hardest hit is the tech giant NVIDIA, whose stocks were down more than 6%. This comes as the U.S. government tightened its export rules, so NVIDIA will require licenses to export its most popular H20 AI chip to China. The overall outlook for U.S. markets remains negative. Gold prices hit a record high on Wednesday, climbing to more than $3,300 an ounce as the U.S. escalated its trade dispute with China. The 2.6% increase came as investors' concerns are growing about rising tensions between the world's two largest economies. Amid the U.S.-China trade war, the World Trade Organization has revised its 2025 forecast. It now predicts a sharp decline in global trade, the steepest drop since the pandemic.
The World Trade Organization has sharply downgraded its forecast for global trade, warning of the steepest decline in merchandise trade since the pandemic. In its latest annual trade outlook, the WTO now expects global goods trade to shrink by 0.2% in 2025, a dramatic shift from the 3.0% growth it had projected just 6 months ago. The downgrade follows rising trade tensions as the US and China remain engaged in escalating trade war. According to the WTO, if the US proceeds with a full reinstatement of its earlier broad tariffs, global goods trade could fall by as much as 1.5%.
It's not so easy this year.
A reinstatement of reciprocal tariffs would shave 0.6 percentage points off this forecast, lowering the projected growth rate to minus 0.8%. This is almost the 1 percentage point contraction we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Now, a broader spread of policy uncertainty beyond U.S. trading relationships would reduce growth by another 0.7 percentage points, implying a total decline in global merchandise trade of 1.5% percentage points in 2025 if both downside risks materialize.
Such a downturn would mark the most severe slump in trade since the height of the COVID-19 crisis in 2020.
States who are subject.
Services trade, while not directly subject to tariffs, is also expected to be adversely affected. Declines in goods trade will reduce demand for related services such as transport and logistics, while broader economic uncertainty is expected to dampen demand for travel and investment-related services. As a result, the volume of global services trade, and I should stress it's the volume, not the value, is now forecast to grow by 4.0% in 2025 and 4.1% in 2026, well below the baseline projections of 5.1% and 4.8% without the tariff changes.
The organization warned that continued protectionism and uncertainty could have severe negative consequences for the global economy if current trends persist.
Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs have recoiled and hit the very heads of financial giants that applauded him just weeks ago as he outlined his plans promising growth and fortune.
Welcome to the third edition of the FII Priority Summit in Miami. This year, we are starting with an exceptional session. It is my distinct
Wall Street's biggest names filled the Miami Beach Conference Hall.
They had to come to hear US President Donald Trump outline what sounded like a new age of prosperity. Executives from BlackRock, Apollo, JP Morgan and Vista Equity cheered as he promised a box full of ambitions, wealth, growth, transformation. But just weeks later, that future-brimming box cracked open, and what spilled out triggered panic. The sound of applause from America's financial elites faded. Hands once raised in celebration scrambled to respond to a full-blown trade war that Trump has ignited. On 2 April, he launched a sweeping tariff program, rattling markets. The S&P 500 shed more than $5 trillion in value in just 2 days. Bond markets buckled. Foreign capital began flowing out. Retailers like Walmart slashed their forecasts. Wall Street's optimism turned to unease. Trump had long threatened reciprocal tariffs. Few expected him to go this far. His team insisted the policy was about fairness. Critics, even within his former circle, called it retribution. This term is different. Gone are the Wall Street confidants with open White House access. In their place stands a closed circle, with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent declaring MAGA doesn't stand for Make M&A Great Again. Business leaders now see it clearly. Trump's economic revolution isn't built for them. It's built for the heartland, not the high-rises. Billionaires like Bill Ackman and Dan Loeb have spoken out. Few have the president's ear. Even Trump's allies misjudged him. They never took him seriously, one confidant told the Financial Times. He remembers who stood with him and who didn't. When the market chaos hit its peak, Trump blinked. On 9 April, he delayed full implementation of the tariffs. Not because of pressure from donors, but because the signs were unmistakable. Bond market distress, a faltering dollar, private equity on edge. For Wall Street, it was a jolt. Trump may speak the language of business, but he is not their president. As one investor put it, we are betting on a Super Bowl where we don't know the teams or the rules. The revolution is underway, Trump says. Markets will just have to keep up.
On the escalating global trade war, state of the markets, and new partnerships being struck, we're talking with Ricardo Evangelista of the Active Trades, joining us from London. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. First off, what do you make of the blowback Trump's back and forth with tariffs and a full-on trade war with China brought upon his own economy and the U.S. markets?
Hello, good evening. Yes, I think the markets got it slightly wrong with Donald Trump. Before the beginning of his second mandate, most were expecting Donald Trump to deliver tax cuts, to deliver deregulation, and perhaps a little bit of tariffs as well. In the end, what happened was that Donald Trump's approach to deploying his tariffs policy was totally unexpected and caused chaos. As we know, going backwards and forwards with policies and measures that can have a strong impact on not just the American economy, but on the entire global economic ecosystem is not good, because what the markets like to see is stability and being able to predict what's going to happen. Donald Trump flipped everything on its head, and this is why we are seeing this lack of trust reflected in massive losses in US stocks, depreciation of the US dollar, treasury yields rising, and then safe haven assets like gold or the Swiss franc benefiting from the flows of assets from US to safety.
One of the tariffs he hasn't backed down yet is on China. Beijing is now looking not only at its broader region to boost trade, they also called on Brussels to stand together against what they called American bullying. Xi Jinping says China will defend free trade. Does China have the upper hand currently, and how do you see this entire trade crisis ending?
I wouldn't say that China has the upper hand, but also I wouldn't agree with what Donald Trump said when he alluded to China not having any good cards to play. I think China has been preparing for a development like this for years, perhaps for decades. China is today a very strong innovator and is a serious competitor to the United States in terms not just of economy but also of geopolitical influence. So I think that for China this is bad news. There's no other way to look into it. I think China would prefer the status quo that we have pre-Trump. But I think that Trump, by trying to go after China, is doing it in a way that is also detrimental for the United States, not just for its economy, but also for the relationship with its traditional allies. And you mentioned Europe there and the potential approaching of Europe and China in order to find some common ground in facing the US. I don't think that will be good for Europe either, but I think that eventually what we will see, if this dynamic continues, what we will see is that the US will perhaps be more isolated and other large trading blocs will organically develop deeper connections.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Meanwhile, China's Xi Jinping is continuing his Southeast Asia tour. In his Vietnam and Malaysia visits, he presented China as a source of stability and certainty amid tensions brought about by U.S. tariffs. Xi is set to also visit Cambodia.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived in Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia on Tuesday. He was warmly welcomed by Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. It's part of his 5-day visit to Southeast Asia this week. China is already carrying out several projects under the Belt and Road Initiative with Malaysia, including the largest, which is an $11.2 billion railway. China is also Malaysia's largest trading partner. On Monday, he was in Vietnam, where he defended free trade, presenting China as a key source of regional stability and certainty. Xi held talks with Vietnamese Communist Party General Secretary To Lam, where they focused talks on strengthening economic cooperation between both nations. 45 agreements were signed between the two countries on supply chains and railway projects. China also promised to create broader opportunities for the export of Vietnamese agricultural products to the Chinese market. However, the South China Sea issue continues to create tensions between China and both Vietnam and Malaysia. The meeting in Hanoi came just days after US President Donald Trump imposed new tariffs that shook global markets. Trump accused China and Vietnam of trying to mess with the United States. Xi Jinping's visit holds strategic significance for China in terms of strengthening its position in the region. Amid the impact of the US tax hikes, Beijing has seized the opportunity to present itself as a responsible superpower. After visiting Malaysia, Xi will fly to Cambodia.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said progress on a nuclear agreement with Iran will hinge on verifying its uranium enrichment and weapons programs. Witkoff told Fox News that key issues include Iran's missile stockpile and bomb trigger capabilities. Tehran has, however, long denied seeking nuclear weapons. Witkoff's comments come ahead of the second round of U.S.-Iran nuclear talks this Saturday.
The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about two critical points. One, enrichment. As you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%, in other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. So this is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program, and then ultimately verification on weaponization. That includes missiles, the type of missiles that they have stockpiled there, and it includes the trigger for a bomb. And I think we're here to have, as the president indicated, and I take my direction from him every day that I go to work, we're here to see if we can solve this situation diplomatically and with dialogue.
The UK and the European Union mobilized major funding for Sudan as the civil war passed the 2-year mark with no signs of slowing anytime soon. The RSF had earlier unveiled a parallel government in the country. Our Naba Muhyiddin has the latest in Port Sudan.
The UK and the European Union announcement of providing Sudan with $600 million of humanitarian assistance that was announced in London on Tuesday in a donation conference was highly welcomed by Sudanese people and by NGOs, while it was condemned by the Sudanese government that said it was not invited to such important conference and so it will not recognize any outcomes of such conference. The situation on the ground is beyond dire, so such conference will help millions of people who are trapped in war zones and who are suffering the war sites of the war. Meanwhile, the RSF leader Mohammed Hamdan Daglo announced that he has formed a government in the areas that he's controlling, which is 4 states out of 5 states in Darfur alone. Such announcement was condemned by Sudanese people and by international blocs, as it will complicate an already fragile political situation in the country. While the RSF leader has not announced the names of his cabinet, but this step was rejected by Sudanese people and by the Sudanese government, as it will put the country on a scenario of a total split authority, so it will further deepening the humanitarian and security situation. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation and the security situation on the ground is deteriorating every day, especially in Al-Fashir, where hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing the violence, the people who have escaped the violence in Zamzam and Abu Shuwa camp that was attacked by the RSF this week, where RSF fighters killed at least 300 people according to United Nations. The situation is beyond dire and the aid was blocked. Many international organizations and NGOs could not even deliver aid for people on the ground, and medical staff were targeted by RSF as well. So the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan is deepening every day, and it needs an urgent solutions by international partners and by regional blocs to push on the warring parties to end the war soon, or at least to push on the RSF to end the besiege of Al-Fashir and end targeting innocent civilians in displacement camps. Naba Muhyiddin for AnewZ, Port Sudan in Sudan.
Indigenous rights activists from around the world convened at the United Nations to press for greater international recognition for anti-colonial independence movements. Our Ubay Shabander brings the story from New York.
Human rights defenders and indigenous rights activists from the Pacific to the Caribbean gathered on Tuesday at the United Nations headquarters in New York to raise their collective voices on an international stage.
Let us reclaim our identity with pride and purpose. Ubuntu.
Organized by the Baku Initiative Group, an international non-governmental organization dedicated to empowering indigenous rights activists, the conference, titled Decolonization, Silent Revolution, offered a unique forum for the human rights defenders and the indigenous activists to work together and learn from each other in their struggle against colonial oppression. Vero, a Kanak indigenous rights activist from the remote Pacific island of New Caledonia, came to the UN to highlight his people's struggle.
It's my life to fight for my people and my country.
The French government, which still to this day controls New Caledonia, launched a violent military crackdown against indigenous Kanak activists last year.
We want the freedom for all the people around the world, so that's how we work together to protect the human rights and indigenous rights. And today was a good opportunity with the international conference organized by the Azerbaijan and the Baku Initiative Group, and I would like to say thank you.
Meanwhile, the Baku Initiative Group has held a series of conferences to amplify the struggle for indigenous rights, particularly those of the Kanak people in New Caledonia.
In the next several years, we will see Kanak people very independent. The Baku Initiative Group supports fair struggle and only against colonialism and neocolonialism under the international law.
Indigenous rights activists seeking independence face an uphill struggle. The Kanak people of New Caledonia cannot hope to match the military might of the colonial French armed forces. But the activists that gathered here at the UN with the Baku Initiative Group were confident that one day they will prevail. How do you say in French, free New Caledonia, en français?
Vive l'indépendance de la Kanaki Nouvelle-Calédonie.
Ube Shabander, New York, AnewZ.
Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili met with Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev. From energy exports to transport links, the two leaders stressed the role both countries play in Europe's energy security and the future of the South Caucasus region. Our Orhan Amashov has more.
On his first official foreign trip, Georgian President Mikhail Kavalashvili is here in Baku. He arrived yesterday and today he held one-on-one meeting with his Azerbaijani counterpart, President Ilham Aliyev. Just a few moments ago, both leaders were here addressing the media representative. That was a press briefing, not a classical press conference. The importance of the fact that this is Georgian President's first foreign trip has been re-emphasized on a number of occasions by both leaders as a moment testifying to the growing significance of strategic relations between these two Caucasian nations. Both leaders talked about connectivity as an essential element. President Aliyev talked about Georgia and Azerbaijan having built this network based on transport, energy lines in this region and the necessity of foreign actors taking this into account. He said that effectively in this region, Azerbaijan and Georgia are building and have been building for some considerable time that essential infrastructure for the middle corridor. And therefore, the importance of these two countries and the relationship between them, of course, go beyond the scope of this region.
Azərbaycan və Gürcüstan birgə həyata keçirdiyi neft-qaz.
As I mentioned, many investment projects that unite us are of great importance for a wider geography. The oil and gas projects, the oil and gas pipelines, and the transport and communication initiatives jointly implemented by Azerbaijan and Georgia are truly of great significance. These projects have not only reshaped the transportation and energy map of the South Caucasus, but also that of the entire Eurasian region. If we are talking about the energy security of Europe today, it is impossible to imagine it without Azerbaijan and Georgia. Currently, Azerbaijan exports natural gas to 12 countries, including Georgia, and these exports are carried out through Georgia.
And Georgian President also mentioned about this connectivity agenda. When Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kabakhidze was here just 2 months ago, back then the focus was fundamentally on figures, on trade, and being perhaps more detailed on that front. But on this occasion, leaders were fundamentally focusing on political dialogue element of the bilateral relations. Georgian President talked extensively about the self-sufficiency, national pride, necessity of deciding on one's national affairs without waiting for somebody, for some third party, actually taking actions on your behalf about the preservation of national values, with these elements being seen as key sensibilities dominating today's meeting. Of course, Azerbaijan-Armenian peace process has also been touched upon, and Georgian President described this as a very important moment in terms of, without using the term House of Caucasus, but creating this structure within this region.
I am sure that our common future involves a successful, economically strong and prosperous South Caucasus. where our peoples will be able to live together in accordance with their own customs and traditions, rather than under so-called liberal values. Unfortunately, our countries have been repeatedly subjected to double standards and interference in internal affairs by foreign forces in recent years. Despite the numerous efforts, we are resolutely eliminating these threats, ensuring the security and stability of the region. No third country or organization can know better than us what is best for our peoples. I am glad that cooperation between Azerbaijan and Georgia in the protection of common interests has been stepped up. And Mr. President, I would like to thank you again for that.
Ultimately, both leaders have been focusing on this self-sufficiency, necessity of taking actions today for the greater good of the region. And Georgian President also invited Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev to Georgia, emphasizing the importance and growing significance of the bilateral relations between these two countries.
A planned EU military aid package to Armenia has stirred tensions as Hungary pushes for equal treatment of Azerbaijan.
Hungary has blocked a €10 million military aid package intended for Armenia under the European Peace Facility, EPF. The aid, composed of non-lethal military assistance, was aimed at equipping a battalion-level field camp in Armenia. The EPF, launched in 2021, is the European Union's primary tool for financing military support outside the bloc. While most of its funds have so far gone to Ukraine, the 2024 package marks the first instance of the EU extending EPF military aid to Armenia and Azerbaijan. However, Hungary has withheld its approval for 6 weeks, reportedly demanding that Azerbaijan be included in the discussions and receive a matching aid package. According to diplomatic sources, Budapest insisted that Baku be granted €10 million in support for demining operations as a precondition for lifting its veto. Efforts to resolve the deadlock continued as recently as Monday, but sources said that negotiations failed to produce a breakthrough. Hungary's stance reflects its close ties with Azerbaijan and its push for a more balanced EU approach in the South Caucasus region.
As the trial of Ruben Vardanyan and other former separatist leaders continues in Baku, the French foreign minister commented on the legal process, which Azerbaijani foreign ministry in turn condemned. France's role in the region is perceived quite differently in Baku and Yerevan. Joining us to briefly talk on this is Sultan Zahidov of the Air Center in Baku. Welcome, thank you for joining us. Now, many in Azerbaijan see this case as evidence of Armenia's state responsibility for some of the actions taken in Karabakh, as the sides are reportedly on the verge of a peace deal with some preconditions remaining. How sensitive do you think that third parties should be on commenting on internal affairs of Azerbaijan as well as the peace process?
Well, it's definitely sensitive. First of all, this statement issued by Jean-Noël Barrot on the sidelines of the EU Foreign Ministerial meeting in Luxembourg is once again an indication of a clear attempt by France to interfere into the internal matters of Azerbaijan. And this is a clear violation of one of the core principles of international law, which is non-interference of internal matters of other states. And secondly, this statement can be regarded as an attempt to obstruct judicial processes, ongoing judicial processes of those who have been accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Those individuals of Armenian origin, they have been accused of targeting civilians, terrorizing them. And, there is this principle of prohibition of targeting civilians. This is a jus cogens of international law, which is fundamental principle of international law, which has been clearly violated by those individuals and by the military political leadership of Armenia.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice and offering your insights.
You are welcome. It was my pleasure.
Astana is hosting the second Central Asian Media Forum, bringing together leading industry voices from Europe to East Asia. Fariza Kalimurzina reports from the event.
This is the second Central Asian Media Forum since 2022. As global attention increasingly shifts towards Central Asia, the way information is shared has never been more important. Today's forum brings together key players of the media industry, the people who report the news, shoot stories, and shape public discourse.
Key topics this year include digitalization, influence of social media, and new models for international collaboration. Many experts agree on the crucial value of the younger audience for the modern media, and that the media strategies, content, and its delivery should aim specifically for this target group.
Yes, younger audience are our main target group because, of course, media always tends to be a young form of communication. And so for Euronews, it's a very, very big part of our innovation strategy to ask ourselves and give the answers how we can reach young people. And so all social media activities are in the core of our innovation process.
It is really difficult to imagine the world without the social media today, particularly for the youth, for the Generation Z and for the Generation Alpha. This is where they were born using this technology, so it's really natural for them to use this. But on the other hand, how they digest media, what they read, what they see is rapidly changing. Most of them are becoming really tired of advertisements of bloggers and influencers, and we see a certain decline of a trust to a bloggers industry.
The event signals the region's rising role in shaping the future of journalism. The forum has become a major platform for dialogue on the future of media in Central Asia.
Well, first, Uzbekistan is an integral part of Central Asia. We have bilateral and multilateral cooperation with the countries of Central Asia. We have established MOUs with Kazakhstan, with Azerbaijan. We're also planning to sign the roadmaps with Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. So that's why it's very important, but also important to gain some information, knowledge, know-how, how to create content, how to moderate content.
As Central Asia works to strengthen its media identity and build new bridges of cooperation, the forum highlights a region not only adapting to global trends, but aiming to shape them.
Now over to Afghanistan. The Taliban authorities have stepped up their diplomatic efforts, hosting officials from around the world to talk trade and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
In recent weeks, the Taliban-led authorities in Afghanistan have intensified diplomatic activity with regional and international actors. High-level visits to Kabul included a senior Iranian delegation aiming to boost trade ties, a Russian ambassador discussing economic cooperation, and officials from Kazakhstan exploring strategic partnerships. Afghanistan's de facto foreign minister also made recent visits to Saudi Arabia and Oman to enhance bilateral relations, while a representative from the Afghan Red Crescent attended a polio eradication conference in Qatar, urging global support. These engagements reflect a growing trend of normalization. Despite initial uncertainty following the Taliban's return to power over 3 years ago, countries like Russia, China, Iran, the UAE, and others are now actively engaging with Kabul on trade and regional cooperation. Notably, with the election of US President Donald Trump, there have been some visible developments in US Taliban engagements. The Taliban's release of US prisoners as a goodwill gesture, the rare visit by high-level US delegation to Kabul, and the removal of bounties on Taliban leaders are all signals of a changing dynamic. Afghanistan has also expanded ties with neighbors such as Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and others, developments that mark a significant shift in the Taliban's foreign relations, once thought unlikely. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for AnewZ.
Turkey says its stance on Syria remains firm. The country's president Recep Tayyip Erdogan has issued a new warning, saying that Ankara will not allow any move to redraw Syria's map.
Milletimin
President
Recep Tayyip Erdogan addressed the nation on Monday night following a cabinet meeting in Ankara, drawing red lines over Syria's future. Held at the presidential complex, the meeting came amid renewed talk of an autonomous corridor in northern Syria, a concept Turkey views as a direct threat. Without naming names, Erdogan signaled firm opposition to any effort to redraw Syria's map under the guise of peacekeeping. The warning followed what Erdogan called a turning point in Syria, the events of December 8, when power shifted among opposition groups with Turkey's support. Since then, Ankara has argued that a new era has begun, one that must be recognized by both allies and rivals. Referencing past military campaigns that dismantled a so-called terror corridor, Erdogan said Turkey would resist any new partition efforts, even those with international backing. His message also targeted outside actors.
Kimse hatalı hesap yapmamalı. Kışkırtmalar karşısındaki
No one should make miscalculations. Our calm and composed stance in the face of provocations must never be perceived as a weakness. Especially on the issue of Syria, certain actors should value Turkey's friendship rather than test the limits of our patience, and accordingly adjust their rhetoric and policies. They should act like a state, not like an organization.
Örgüt gibi değil, devlet gibi hareket etmelidir.
While the cabinet had been expected to focus on domestic reforms, the tone shifted amid reports of cross-border movements near Syria's northeast. Ankara appears readying for regional engagement on its own terms.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to AnewZ.